Nerd Night number 61, MRI magic, proton power, and why we play video games.
Hi, how's everybody doing? Good, great. So let's get this going forward. So magic, really cool images. A joke I shamelessly stole from Grey's Anatomy. What MRI stands for is how I introduce it to the kids that I would scan. It actually stands for magnetic resonance imaging, and I'm going to be going into what that is, how it works, and how we use it to figure out how the brain works. So introduction. So I'm Samuel Carpenter. I was a research assistant at a behavioral neuroscience lab in Portland, Oregon. So that's me. So that is a funny picture. You're supposed to laugh at that. So that's a technique for public speaking. If you're afraid of making a fool of yourself, you can just put a funny picture of yourself. Fear gone. Currently, stay-at-home cat dad. I moved here this fall for my spouse's career. So I had to leave my work and school. But I had 8 successful years, and I'm going to talk with you tonight about what I've learned and what I did. So what did I do? So I worked for about 8 years in a developmental neuroscience research lab, and I lost count around 2016, but at that point I'd scanned just shy of 1,000 people. I kept scanning to 2008, just shy of 2018, so I scanned around 1,200 people. This is the lab in 2013, about a dozen people, and then it grew to several dozen right around the time that I left. And so the lab I worked for, the lab was a FAIR neuroimaging lab. And our PI, he got a medal in 2013 from Obama for his recognition of early science career. So it was a little bit of a stressful place to work. We had kind of a high output. And we were located in Portland, Oregon. And then why? Because science. And how did we do what we do? Let me tell you. So magnetic resonance imaging, I'm just going to walk you through what this acronym is, and hopefully by the end we'll understand a little bit better about how it actually scans the brain. So magnetic. We usually think of things as being either magnetic or not. Let me back up. There's 2 principles. One is magnetic or not, and the other is, let's just say magnetism. They're actually really closely intertwined. So anytime you have electricity, so let's say in a wire, you also have a magnetic field around that wire. And if you're going to turn that wire into a loop, you get a magnetic field inside that loop. The other principle is, which I jumped ahead of myself, everything responds to magnetic field. You think of things as magnetic or not, but if you have a strong enough magnetic field, everything would respond. Even water, wood. This is a copyright infringement water molecule here. I realized that just today, we're recording this. Shit. So resonance. Keep those 2 principles in mind. Now we have resonance. And resonance is usually talked about something in terms of destruction. Like if you and you have a wine glass, you can break the wine glass, or Tacoma Narrows Bridge. But it's one of those things where we say resonance, but we don't know exactly what it means. So I'm going to try and have you guys at least leave here with what resonance is. So most physical items have some type of resonant frequency. And a classic example is a swing. So this is a terrible, lonely swing. But if you have a swing, you put somebody on it, what would you think would cause or change how many swings you'd get per minute, per second, per unit of time? Do you think the weight of the person would matter? Yeah, you would think. Do you think how fast you push them? You would think. But no, it's actually just the length. So you can have the same weight people on 2 different length swings, or different weight people on the same length swing, and if you change the length, you're going to change how many swings you have per minute or per second. But if you change the weight, it doesn't change how fast they're moving. So what this also means is that the length determines the rate. And if I had a swing set where I say it was creaky, like an old swing set, like creak, creak, if I had my back turned and I just hear the creak every time you swing, I could tell you how long that swing set was. So if we create the swing set from hell here, then if somebody were, say I built this, and then I said, hey, go pick one and go swing on it. If I heard that creak, I could tell which swing they're on because I know how long it is, because I know how long it is between the times of creaking. So I see some nods. Good, hopefully. So how do swing sets from hell and loops of electricity make an image? So what we do is we make a really strong magnetic field, and we change that magnetic field throughout it. And we create this magnetic field by many, many loops of wire, and we run current through that. It's not wire, it's superconductors, but that's a whole other talk that's hours long. And so you have your stronger and weaker magnetic field, and then you put something in here. Here it's just I'm killing myself with the copyright infringement, but these items respond to the magnetic field because everything responds to the magnetic field. Guess what they respond with? They're resonant frequencies. So you have magnetic resonance imaging. And because we vary the strength of the magnetic field, we vary the resonant frequencies, and that's what we actually read, and that's how we get an image. Now, these are water molecules. What we're actually reading is not water, it's protons. It's the hydrogen. And so in your body, you have lots of water, and you have lots, well, hopefully not lots, but you have fat. And so the different amounts of hydrogen and in the fat and the water allow us to see different types of tissues. This brings us to structural imaging. So we can vary the signal, and we can change that signal so that we can get contrasts between tissue types. This is the same person, same slice of brain, but a different type of image. So you can see it's, in one, what is dark is light. It's not an inverse. They actually are different imaging types, so that gives a little bit of different types of information. If we combine them together in a computer, we can actually see some different tissue types come out. So here we have gray matter on the outside and white matter sort of on the inside. It's not really gray or white, it's more pink-ish, but in the image it's gray. So another type of image is looking actually at water. It's looking how water moves just by diffusion, how it moves around. If water can move around freely, then it's represented by a sphere. If water is restricted and it can only move in certain directions, then it's represented by a, does that show up? Yeah. Represented by a squished sphere. And yeah, so why does that matter? So in your brain, you have all these neurons. This is a horrible cartoon of a neuron. So in the cell body, you have lots of room for water to move around. In the axon, the connecting fiber between neurons, you have less room to move around, more in just the direction of the neuron. And so we can actually see that with the scanner. So in your brain, you have gray matter, which is mostly cell bodies, and axons, which are mostly white matter. There are variations, I'm aware of simplification, but generally that's true. So we can see in this type of image, instead of sort of a gray contrast image, we actually get these shapes back. Instead of an image of white and black, we get these shapes. And we get a bunch of them, and we can actually connect the dots using whole loads of math, and we get what's called a tract. So we can connect different regions. We can see the actual wiring of the brain, actually how it's connected, how it's structured. And that's a tract. And then loads a whole lot of more math, like a stupid amount, like 2 days on a computer running continuously. And we can get that. And so this, I think it's actually the same person, but it's different. This is all of the connections in their brain that we could read. So this is all of the sort of wiring of their brain from different parts of the brain. And this is what we call structural imaging. This type is called tractography. So next I have functional imaging. And so we think typically functional imaging, we think of you go into the scanner, we see this on House and other horribly inaccurate TV shows. And you do nothing, you do something, you do nothing, you do that over and over and over again. Why do you have to do that over and over and over again? Because the signal is really noisy. So when you're doing nothing, you get a noisy signal. You do something, you get a noisy signal. And the difference between these is not all that great, as you can see by the bounded boxes. And again, it takes loads of math to figure out which areas are actually responding. And it doesn't really matter, not doesn't, but you're doing something or nothing, and we're trying to see the difference and what areas are responsible for that doing something. Another type of scan is also functional imaging, but you simply do nothing. And why would you want to do this? Because if you're doing a task, if you're doing something, can you get a baby to do that same task? Or an animal, or a mouse, or a monkey? So if you learn about the brain when you're doing nothing, you could compare brains across all these different types where you couldn't get them to do a task. So that's why we would have them do nothing. But how do we figure out what you're doing when you're doing nothing? So you'd be laying in the scanner, and we're not just looking at one brain area or two brain areas. Looking at all of the brain areas. You get a brain area, you get a brain area, you get a brain area. All of the times. Also, we get all of the brain signals. So what is this mess? How do we clarify this mess? So what we do is we take all these brain signals and we correlate them with each other. Correlation is another term kind of like resonance where people are like, oh, that correlates. What's that mean again? So correlation is just how things sort of move in relation. So if something goes up, it also goes up. If something goes down, it also goes down. So how correlated are they together? Another way to look at it is if you have one signal, and if you plot that against the other signal, how liney is it? Is it really liney? Is it not liney? Is it negatively liney, which would be negatively correlated? And that's another way, that's actually what we're doing in the computer. And here I've plotted, this is a cartoon. This is not real data. This is just fun. But these purple brain signals are close together. They're correlated. And we have these brain regions. The important thing to note, this is somewhat accurate in terms of what brain regions are responsive. These are different parts of the brain located in different areas, but they're actually operating together, sort of in unison. And that's really weird. And that was discovered in 1995. And everybody's like, what the fuck? Like, are you serious? And then all these other brain areas are responsive. And we do this for the entire brain. Can you guess what comes next? Begins with loads, ends with maths. So loads of maths, and you get all of these correlations, and all these colors are actually really, they're important. The red areas all respond together, yellow areas respond together, blue areas, and so on. And these areas don't only show up when you're doing nothing in the scanner. These are the same areas that show up when you're doing something in the scanner. The same areas are responsible for attention, vision, hearing, focusing, tasks, all that stuff. They show up in clusters together. So areas that would operate together show up very well correlated. So we have pretty pictures from structural imaging and functional imaging. So how do we use these? So we convert them into matrices. Not a horrible or excellent movie followed by horrible sequels, but these guys. So structural matrix, functional matrix, and you can see there's some patterns in here. And these are actually the same matrices from those previous images I've shown you before. And so it's not much math to make these, but using them is a stupid amount of math. So what we care about is how they're connected, and how does this guy relate to this guy, relate to this, and then also how is that affected in the brain, and how is that affected when you age, and how is that affected in different disorders and stuff. And so to take a little bit of a detour, I'm talking superficially about the maths we use to discover this. Well, what happened? Oh, okay. So how are things connected? So this segue works better in Portland or someplace you don't have the hub airport nearby. But if you've ever flown somewhere, you have to fly out of the way to get to where you're going. Why do I have to fly to Atlanta to get across the country, or why do I have to fly back and forth? The reason for this is because of the way the airlines are organized. And if we think about what would be a different way of organizing airlines, so if we just connected airports with their nearest neighbors, you would have to do a lot of flights to get across country. It would be really inefficient. Can you imagine what kind of mood you'd be in at the end of that day? Like, no. We'd be killing each other. So a different way to organize this is you connect different groups, and so that in order to get across country, you have to fly to the nearest place that has a lot of long-distance flights, and then you fly from there. Detroit obviously has a lot of. This works better when I'm in rural Pennsylvania or something, but you get the idea. We call these areas hubs. We do this. This is a mathematical term as well as we also call these airports hubs. And these hubs actually have special relationships with each other. The hubs with a lot of connections are typically connected with each other. So they have a unique relationship amongst each other and also amongst with all the other areas. So they're highly connected to all the stuff around them. They're also highly connected to a lot of places really, really far away. It turns out the brain works really similarly. And we use this math, and we can use these mathematical techniques to figure out how the brain is structured and organized. Another toy example of this is, you've heard of the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon? So the original version of this game is connecting a movie star to Kevin Bacon via all the movies they've starred in or the co-stars. We're going to play what I call the real version of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, because we all walk out winners. So Kevin Bacon went to high school with a woman named Sandra. Sandra went to college with a woman named Melissa. I know this because Melissa had a child, me. So I'm 3 degrees from Kevin Bacon. So you all, if you remember nothing from this talk, you are now 4 degrees from Kevin Bacon. So hopefully that deserves applause at the end. So finally, I was getting to this. I feel like people really want to hear what have we learned about the brain and how does it work. Don't know all that yet, but we're working on it. So the brain is a network and it's organized as such. And this paper, which I'm actually on for some reason, came out a couple of years ago, and it shows how, remember how I talked about these highly connected areas? So you have a lot of highly connected areas connected to each other. It turns out some of those areas are in each of the different networks. So you have highly connected areas of motor connected to highly connected areas of vision, connected to highly connected areas of auditory. And this makes sense because you have to use all of your stuff. Like you need everything to connect to each other, but you don't want every little part of your brain connected to every other part of your brain, because that would just be too much. So you have these like super high traffic areas. This is represented by so this connection here, and this paper actually looks at how it changes as you age. And it turns out when you're younger, you don't have this structure as much. It's there, but it gets stronger and stronger as you age. And that makes sense because kids are shitty at everything. Like, and then they get better and better and better and better. You know, and so the other sort of sidetrack is, what if they stop getting better? What if something goes wrong? So we can look at typically developing children. And there's too much here to go into what this all means, but just see this blob. So it's blobby. And then, so ADHD is a developmental neurodisorder. So it affects kids in their youth. Some don't figure it out until they're older, but it affects them in their youth. And you see this is not as blobby. And what's happening is those highly connected areas aren't as highly connected to each other. And they have more connections to all these other parts of the brain, which makes sense. Because if you know anybody with ADHD, they're always talking like, what are you talking about? They're just bringing up stuff that makes no sense to the conversation, or they're maybe a little bit more distracted. So that kind of makes sense in that story. We also compared in the same study to autism. It turns out that their regions are incredibly highly connected. And this paper looks at structural and functional. I believe this image is from the structural imaging, so that tracks I showed you before. We looked at them both. And in both, for all of these guys, the autism, they showed much higher connections amongst their higher connected areas. And that also kind of makes sense because one aspect of some people with autism is they get focused on something and it's hard for them to deviate, harder for them to change tasks. They get stuck on certain things. So we're using this is what our lab focused on, was how the brain changes as you age and how it's affected in developmental disorders. So what we kind of stumbled into in this process is, so those previous ones it takes groups and hundreds and hundreds of these individuals to get all of this data. And we developed some techniques that actually can pick out an individual from a crowd. So you can sort of identify the brain. There's another whole different type of stupid amount of math that goes into how we do this. But this image shows how we use this technique to identify individuals, and then amongst a group of a whole bunch of other people, and we can find that different areas, so blue means they're very similar amongst people, and there's less variation. And so the brain areas that are responsible for motion, for motor, would be around here and here, and then so vision back here, and auditory along the temporal lobes, all this stuff. So those don't change that much amongst individuals. And this also makes sense because we've had vision and hearing and movement for millions of years before we were human. So you'd think that that stuff's kind of worked out. Stuff that sort of makes us human and makes us individuals, all of the focus and concentration, all the other aspects of going to personality. How close are we? Perfect timing, thank you. So it turns out, and we can use this to help identify also what goes wrong and what's happening as you age. And let's see. And that's it. That's the brain. So these are the papers I referenced. These two are the best of all of them because I'm on them. And then, so I have cool stuff that I would like to include, but it's just too long. So if you want to take a picture of this or take a picture of this, do so now. And thank you.
This program was recorded on January 17th, 2019 at Live 102 South 1st Street, Ann Arbor, Michigan.